A loaf of bread cost millions, an egg, a week's salary. And just to buy milk, Germans hauled wheelbarrows full of cash through the streets. Banknotes were so worthless that children played with them as building blocks, and people burned money for heat because firewood was more expensive. This isn't a scene from a dystopian novel, it happened in Germany in 1923. The hyperinflation crisis of the Weimar Republic wasn't just a case of extreme devaluation. It was a brutal warning of what happens when an economy collapses, when trust in government disintegrates, and when money, the foundation of modern society, stops meaning anything at all. Today on, we dive deep into one of the most surreal economic disasters in history. A financial nightmare that shook the heart of Europe, destroyed generations of savings, and paved the way for extremism. But to understand how this happened, we must rewind to the roots of the catastrophe. Germany had just suffered a catastrophic defeat in World War I. The war had left millions dead, cities destroyed, and an economy in ruins. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, added insult to injury. It blamed Germany for the war and demanded reparations so massive that even economists at the time questioned whether they could ever realistically be paid. These reparations totaled the equivalent of hundreds of billions of euros today. Germany was forced to hand over territory, give up overseas colonies, drastically reduce its military, and send regular payments to the Allied powers. But the real damage was psychological. The German people felt betrayed. Many believed they had been stabbed in the back by their own politicians, who signed the treaty and dismantled the old monarchy. In its place emerged the Weimar Republic, a democratic experiment in a society that had little trust in democracy. From its birth, the Weimar government faced impossible odds. The economy was fragile. The political landscape was fractured between communists and nationalists, with street violence, assassinations, and attempted coups becoming part of daily life. During the war, Germany had suspended the gold standard and printed unbacked money to finance the war effort. Instead of raising taxes, they created more currency. It was a gamble, one that delayed immediate consequences, but planted the seeds of financial ruin. By the time the war ended, inflation was already a concern, but it was post-war instability that poured gasoline on the fire. In 1922, the crisis escalated dramatically. Germany fell behind on its reparations payments. In response, France and Belgium occupied the Ruhr region, Germany's industrial heartland, intending to extract coal, steel, and machinery as payment. This occupation dealt a severe blow to Germany's productivity. Factories ground to a halt. The government encouraged workers to go on strike, promising to pay their wages. But with no tax revenue and no goods to export, the state turned again to the printing press. And this time they printed with abandon. The value of the German mark began to evaporate. Inflation turned into hyperinflation. Prices didn't just rise daily, they rose hourly. Stories spread of people bringing baskets of cash to buy groceries, only to find prices had doubled by the time they reached the counter. By late 1923, the numbers became surreal. A single US dollar was worth 4.2 trillion German marks. A loaf of bread cost over 200 billion. Businesses couldn't update their prices fast enough. Restaurants stopped printing menus and instead charged prices based on the minute. Workers were paid twice a day and rushed to spend their wages before they became worthless. The printing presses couldn't keep up. At the peak, Germany was printing more than 400 quadrillion marks per month. Banknotes were being produced in denominations of billions and trillions, and still, they couldn't meet demand. People began using the paper not as currency but for wallpaper, insulation, or fuel. And all the while, the population fell into deeper despair. Unlike the thunderous violence of war, the collapse of Weimar was silent. No bombs fell, no cities burned, but the devastation was just as profound. The German middle class, the backbone of any stable democracy, was annihilated. People who had saved for decades watched their life savings become worthless overnight. Retirees who had carefully planned for old age now couldn't afford a loaf of bread. Families sold jewelry, furniture, anything of value just to survive. Money had lost meaning. Transactions reverted to barter. People paid with coal, alcohol, or cigarettes. Children played with stacks of cash as toys. Entire communities adapted to a new reality where paper money had no worth. There were even stories of civil servants demanding to be paid in food instead of wages. Pensioners protested in the streets, holding signs with slogans like, "I gave my life to Germany and now I starve." The psychological damage was immense. A generation grew up with no trust in currency or government. For many, the only constant was uncertainty. And in the shadows, radical ideologies took root. In late 1923, the chaos reached its breaking point. Then, seemingly overnight, things began to change. A new chancellor, Gustav Stresemann, took control. Under his leadership, the government introduced a new currency backed not by gold, but by tangible assets, land, factories, and property. Strict limits were placed on the issuance of new money. The government negotiated the Dawes Plan with the Allies, restructuring reparations and bringing in foreign loans, especially from the United States. Within months, the spiral of hyperinflation stopped. Prices stabilized. Trust slowly began to return. For a moment, Germany seemed to be pulling itself back from the brink. But the recovery was shallow. The wounds left behind weren't just economic. They were emotional and political. People who had lost everything didn't forget. Many blamed the Weimar Republic, seeing it as weak, corrupt, and incapable. Extremist parties, promising strength and revenge, began gaining ground. And a few years later, one of them would rise to power on a platform built on national humiliation and economic despair. The Weimar hyperinflation didn't just ruin lives, it helped lay the path to dictatorship. The Weimar hyperinflation remains one of the most disturbing economic events in modern history. It shows us how fragile trust in money really is, that a modern economy can't function if people don't believe in their currency. It also reveals a deeper truth, that financial collapse isn't just about numbers. It's about people, about families who lose everything, about societies that fracture under stress. In today's world, debates about inflation, debt, and central banks are everywhere. Some countries are printing money to cover deficits. Others are struggling with rising prices. And while every case is unique, the story of Weimar reminds us what happens when control is lost. Because once people lose faith in money, they start to lose faith in institutions. And once that trust is broken, rebuilding it is far harder than printing any banknote. This story isn't just a chapter in economic textbooks, it's a warning, one we should never forget. If you found this story powerful, subscribe for more in-depth explorations of the moments where history and economics collide. New videos every Thursday. Let the past guide our understanding of the present.